Rings! That mic is really far away. Rings of Power! Episode 4. If you want my spoiler-free thoughts, this episode of Rings of Power I think has the potential to be some people's favorites and some people's least favorite. And that's because this show is at its core not trying to be anything we've seen before, even trying to be Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. It is seeking its own identity, and I respect that. I would rather Rings of Power try to become its own thing than ride on Game of Thrones' vibe or even previous Lord of the Rings work in some ways. Granted, the end results have been mixed for me personally, but I can at least respect Rings of Power's leaning into its own way. And now that we're at a clear mid-season point, I would like to get into my thoughts of Rings of Power as a whole, how it is developing. I've tried to avoid like season thoughts, but I feel like 4 episodes in is deep enough to start getting there. To avoid sounding redundant though, I do want to copy and paste some of just the criticisms and praise I've said before and just put it here quickly. The orcs are superb. The lighting is a bit too bright for me. I genuinely want them to just take it down a couple notches. Though the VFX are fantastic. I feel like they're cranking up the brightness to show off the VFX and go like, look how great they look even when they're not cloaked in shadow. Great. Some shadows are appropriate though. I feel like some of the drama is really working for me on a character level now. I am starting to emotionally become invested. We'll get more into that in a minute, though I'm not as invested as I really would like to be at an episode 4. Set design's brilliant, and there are some dumb character decisions in this episode, but I feel like those characters that we're following that do this are supposed to be foolish, so it didn't necessarily come across as bad writing. Though, I think the writing is fine. I would really like to see it kicked up to match what you'd think the most expensive TV show in history would have in terms of caliber of writing. But before we get into spoilers, a quick word from today's sponsor. Hey, psst, I got a cool sponsor for you. The Lord of Maps has decided to launch their very own Kickstarter that's already been fully funded, guaranteeing anyone else who comes on board will absolutely be getting the product. Why is this fitting for this video though? Well, it is maps drawn in a fantastical style of real-world locations throughout the Earth. I personally have a deep love of maps, and so this kind of book that has also how-to tutorials within it and tools of the trade advice, that's just something I want to go ahead and start doodling every night with. I drew this crummy looking map when I was in college. You know how much I'd be able to improve if I had professionals telling me how to properly do trees and mountains? And quite awesomely, Lord of Maps has decided to include a 15% discount for their website as a whole, so go ahead and check that out as well if you'd just like to buy a piece for your wall and such. And on top of all of that, apparently there's been some Easter eggs referencing specific locations for your local state or a country if it's included. Not to put a boot in your booty, but there is a limited amount of time for this Kickstarter left, so if you would like to grace your coffee table with a wonderful conversation piece, follow the link in the description down below and secure your own Lord of Mappage today. But okay, let's go ahead and jump into spoiler-filled Episode 4 Rings of Power thoughts with a more season as a whole bend to them. So immediately I want to talk about the visions of the fall of Numenor. Yes, they were a bit too bright for me. It is just like in terms of the overall brightness when we get these scenes, but it still was impactful to see that destruction. I didn't love the dialogue between the Queen and Galadriel. Their exchanges just felt a bit stilted, but the acting was actually pretty good. As I said in my previous review, the actors are better than the material they're being given in terms of writing. I've actually really enjoyed the performances here. There is like a wholesome angle being kept in a lot of the performances as well, especially like Elrond this episode. We're actually starting to see the friendship between him and this dwarf really shown and proven to us more than just being told, and that's actually making me care. Though the acting with the dwarves I would say is the least thrilling me, but I do still appreciate that we're getting what seems like different acting approaches, styles based off background, race, age. Within this show, it kind of does add a bit of a dynamic element to the world as a whole. But you juxtapose what I feel like was a good development of relationship with stuff like this political mob we get at one point that just feels too blunt, not appropriate for the setting we're in, and it just took me right out of the show and the tone it was trying to establish, especially how that mob was then flipped around. I get it was trying to justify what happened at the end of the episode, but I feel like you really could have gotten there, even without this scene entirely, but a more tactful approach to the scene as well. Getting into the Isildur conflict, or how he's kicked off the boat, I actually like that we're seeing this character make a decision that we know where it's going to lead. We know this is going to eventually be a disappointment at the end of this character's life, and that is already being set up in a way where he's screwing over people who are absolutely right when they're cursing him out. He's privileged, he's cost them so much, and I really did like the character drama there of someone being like, you're the worst, you didn't actually earn this, and now you cost people who did their opportunity. And Isildur didn't have a counter because he's like, yeah, man, you did. You suck here. And that fits with like a later on what this guy's trajectory is going to be. So I was like, all right, I buy into that. I like that. Though I will say, the captain's saying, I've seen you do this 100 times. That means your failure here must have been on purpose. What are you talking about there, my guy? People could make a mistake the 500th time they've done something. Hand cramps exist. And there's like a lot of character work being done that maybe this is just me overanalyzing, overthinking, but I feel like is setting up what we're going to be getting down the road in terms of corruptions, twisted arcs. Halbrand still totally think is being set up for like in season 3 or 4 to turn into one of the wraiths. Celebrimbor is either already corrupted to some extent by Sauron, or is Sauron in disguise? I think I like the former approach more than the latter, though I could be swayed to liking the latter as well. Which takes me to talking about like the southern people as a whole and how they're being set up to have some like derision and conflict in there. And I think that'll eventually tie into Halbrand's corruption as well in my like prediction. The kid actors who I was talking about making dumb decisions, like him going off on his own with this weapon to go ahead and get some like food and stuff, already not the smartest thing. And then like once the orc arrives, still continuing to carry 1 sack of grain. That's such a risk, man. You don't need that sack of grain. So it was like dumb character decision. I get he's trying to prove himself. He doesn't entirely understand the level of danger, but once he's in that danger, he continued to be dumb to a point where I was like, why are you picking up the sack? Just get out, just go. But like on the opposite end of the writing spectrum, I really like the scene between Elrond and the Dwarven Queen, where she is kind of caught in a lie, doubles down in a sense, where she's able to like almost convince Elrond of her lie, and I actually wish she had, but then it appears that Elrond actually still could tell there was some deception going on and he eavesdropped in maybe my least favorite effect edit of the season so far, showing how he's able to hear and see them at a distance. It just felt like a very fan film type of choice and how they decided to pick that. And there is some hand-holding on an editing level that I just like. There's the footprints that are so obvious that I feel like would have been covered up a little bit better, but Elrond with his enhanced senses still could have absolutely seen if they weren't nearly as obvious. They were that obvious for the audience. I'm so happy it turned out that the dwarves are mining mithril and it wasn't like a Silmaril they found. I was really afraid of that. That would have been too much for this show at this point to handle, so the fact that it turned out to be mithril, I was like, that fits and it works quite well, and it pays off the setup they had there spectacularly. I guess we gotta talk about Adar now, who this is actually something I'm positive on. Not only because it's clearly not Sauron, they don't want us to think it's Sauron, no one thinks this is Sauron, but the idea of a corrupt elf being involved with leading these orcs, and the orcs having the type of idolization they do of a corrupt elf, plays into some unanswered Tolkien lore questions in a way that I really actually like. And the performance from a former Game of Thrones veteran is great. Even the small scene we got, I was like, menacing and weighted presence. Good villain intro. Just getting into like the full thoughts, and I'll say this about the season so far. It is a mixed bag for me. Overall, I think I'm fine with the Rings of Power show, and I'll definitely keep watching. There's really good, intelligent decisions at certain points, and the overall spectacle on its own makes the show worth watching. But there's these frustrating decisions that just seem clumsy in the edit or the writing that just keep pulling me out and preventing me from getting in as far as some elements of this show should earn. I'm more positive on this episode just because there's less of the Harfoots, which have become my least favorite plotline, but I was still distracted by things like having the elf-human romance be shot and depicted in such a way that it just doesn't feel human. And obviously, like, there's an elf, haha, it shouldn't 100% feel human, but people who have a crush on each other, just because they have a crush doesn't mean they stand 2 feet apart from each other every single time they talk. These two always talk at this angle, and I'm like, hey, maybe walk around, give us a bit more dynamic energy to this conversation, and it's not just shot, reverse shot of... You know what I mean? Okay, I need you to not laugh, alright? You can tell we're in love because we stand close. This is how Kayla and I have all of our conversations. This is natural. Stealing from Anthony Fantano for this episode, I'm feeling a strong 6.5 to a soft 7. And I'm not saying this because of my previous issues with Amazon Prime as a studio, but this show, to a T, just feels like an inexperienced studio with a ton of money tried to buy extreme quality, and the end result is just a mixed bag. One that you could absolutely justifiably love if you have certain tastes, or really end up disliking if you have certain tastes. It's frustrating because I know this show is like uber polarizing, and there's just like so many people who love or hate it. I feel like I'm fence sitting, but it's just where I actually am. I'm like, yeah, there's stuff here I like, there's stuff I don't. That's Rings of Power so far. House of the Dragon, I'm definitely going to be doing episode reviews all the way to the end of the season. Rings of Power, I'm starting to feel a bit repetitive, so I don't know if I'll continue with episode to episode reviews, or I'll just end it with a season review once the show's done. Let me know what you prefer in the comments down below. But this has just been my thoughts on episode 4 of Rings of Power. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon to support what I do here. I got merch, I got books, and have a good one, y'all.